I wanted to like this game more than I do, purely out of appreciation for the PlayStation Vita, but I can't deny that it's pretty mediocre, even by Assassin's Creed standards. Despite being remastered, and me playing on a PS5, the game had a load of technical issues such as model detection which interfered regularly with climbing, especially in the bayou, crashes, and more or less everything Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered suffered from. Not only that, but the story and writing felt considerably low effort until the final sequence where it finally appears that they're trying to tell something of a story. The opening alone gave me whiplash with just how and then the presentation felt. Also, it doesn't help that Aveline was voiced by Ash Ketchum's VA of all people, who is neither French nor African in heritage as far as I'm aware. There was potential to tell an awesome story here about an assassin liberating slaves across New Orleans and the East Coast, but the majority of story missions felt so generic and uninspired that you'd be forgiven for forgetting there even was a proper story to begin with. Worsening this was the fact that many key story events were locked behind Citizen E targets, which randomly generate around the map starting in the latter portion of the game. They even locked the true ending behind these targets for some incomprehensible reason. It sucks because there are things to like about this game. When she's allowed, Aveline proves to be a really endearing and likable character, but the general arc for her character is so generic that she feels like little more than a basic Mary Sue, and I think she deserved a lot better. Maybe it's just me, but I can't lie, that French African assassin got me feeling some type of way, y'all. For real, for real. There are some fun mission ideas here, like poisoning soldiers from a distance so as to make them think they're being afflicted by a curse, but the majority of missions boil down to very by-the-books Assassin's Creed objectives, the most irritating of which being tailing missions. I cannot comprehend why the Kenway Saga is so littered with this universally panned mission type, because it legitimately had me dozing off at times. There is a fair amount of content to check out here that can feel worthwhile, including tons of collectibles and unlockables to aim for. For a handheld adaptation of a AAA franchise, this really isn't half bad, and I enjoyed the albeit somewhat simple disguise system, which I honestly wish future games had thought to build upon, though admittedly that could just be the Hitman fanboy in me. But this is a pretty hard game to recommend unless you already happen to own it or are just curious enough to check out another Assassin's Creed game. I mean, it comes bundled with Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered, which can also come bundled with Odyssey's Ultimate Edition, so that's cool, I guess. But unless you happen across it, I can't really say there's much about it that makes me want to recommend it. And that's a shame because Aveline deserved a lot better. I give it a 4 out of 10, at least it didn't actively enrage me like Bioshock Infinite. I can't really be angry with Assassin's Creed Liberation, but I can't deny that I am disappointed. I think I'm gonna come back for the Platinum Trophy, if only because it does seem like it'll be a pretty easy one, and I can at least kind of enjoy playing it, but I'm not exactly clamoring to return to it either. Been curious to get around to this one for a while, and honestly, I'm kinda mixed. On one hand, there are things about Alan Wake that I really liked. The light mechanics were very unique, and I think the game did a great job at implementing them into the combat and exploration. The story was also very engaging and made terrific use of the unreliable narrator, while also being generally well-paced and having a decent supporting cast. On the other hand, certain things really did not sit well with me. Combat is decent, and the light mechanics are interesting, but tying the dodge button to the sprint button, while also having awkward movement controls, made certain encounters needlessly and sometimes extremely frustrating. No, Alan, I in fact did not want you to sprint right into that enemy's attack. I also really didn't appreciate the fact that my inventory would basically be completely dropped between certain levels when it really shouldn't have. Some levels I totally understood, but why on the helicopter ride in episode 5 did Alan just decide to drop every useful item that he was carrying? That just seems really stupid, especially when the beginning of the next level mostly restocked me anyways. I just don't understand. Enemies are also one of the game's greater weaknesses. Variety is sorely lacking, and their dialogue is so random and weird that they mostly detract from any sense of horror. The poltergeists were kind of cool to see introduced in the third episode, but even then it's just objects being hurled at the player. not exactly breaking the mold here. But at its best, the writing easily carries the experience. Aside from a rather abrupt and frankly unsatisfying ending, I thought the story was pretty good, and I was invested pretty much from the get-go. Alan is used extremely well as an unreliable protagonist, and the double meanings behind all of the happenings in the game made for a really compelling narrative. I can easily see why the game amassed the cult following that it did, and although I didn't like the ending, I would be curious to try out American Nightmare and Alan Wake 2. There's a lot holding this game back, but at its best, the experience is really solid, and I can honestly say that I'd recommend it. I give it a 6 out of 10. It's pretty good, but also far from great, and I'm not really interested in going for the Platinum Trophy either. Supergiant really is one of my favorite studios of the modern era. Between this and Transistor, they're 2 for 2 in providing me with a solid gaming experience. Bastion has a lot going for it in regards to its gameplay. There's a ton of gear, abilities, challenges, and more to strive to unlock. There's a decent variety in enemies, and although most levels do feel a bit samey, there's still a good selection both for the story and optional challenges. On top of that is a progression system that feels both rewarding and well-paced, so you always feel like you're getting just enough between levels and after completing challenges, but not so much that it's overbearing. And like with Transistor, I appreciated the optional difficulty modifiers that provide a boost in both XP and currency. This is a great way of allowing the player to tailor the experience to provide them with a proper challenge, whilst rewarding the players who really stack the modifiers against them. Combine that with New Game Plus and the many optional challenges, and I can easily see myself playing way more of this game in the future. That's not to suggest the game is without flaws, though. Far from it, honestly. For starters, those green eyeball enemies. Whoever designed these, whoever approved them, and why they were kept in the final product are questions that'll be eternally beyond me because they are awful. Sometimes they deal like no damage, and sometimes they straight up insta-kill me. Do they just have a 50-50 chance of getting a critical hit with a multiplier of 1,000 if they do? I genuinely do not understand, and the fact that they are basically invulnerable while standing still makes them a colossal pain to deal with. Either you put yourself at a massive risk by going to attack them, or you slowly whittle their health down while they stand completely still. These things were the opposite of fun. Seriously, I hate these things more than I hate Bioshock Infinite. There's also the lock-on system, which is not terrific, because you can only lock on while you're blocking, meaning precise melee attacks in the middle of crowds can be needlessly frustrating, especially when enemies are moving around a lot, which will happen. I don't really understand why locking on couldn't just be its own dedicated toggling mechanic. At least guns still automatically hone in on enemies at a proper range, but still. But aside from that, I really don't have too much in the ways of criticisms towards Bastion. The story was a bit too vague for its own good, but it's also not too hard to follow the sequence of events to the conclusion. The only real issue for me was how the game would frequently mention people, events, factions, etc. without actually bothering to elaborate on who or what those things were in the first place. Kinda made it difficult to get properly invested. I understood most of what was happening by the end, but I can't deny that it felt like the game was expecting investment more than it was actually trying to earn it. I don't need minutes of dialogue like in Mass Effect or Metal Gear, but seriously, what the heck is an aura? They're like the main antagonist's faction, and I genuinely do not know anything about them other than that they look like samurai and they don't want the Bastion restored. I think. Bastion's a good game, but it definitely feels like an early work of Supergiant at times. But even still, there's little that genuinely hinders the experience, and what works is honestly really good. 7 out of 10. I think I'll go back for this Platinum Trophy. Holy crap, this game was a surprise. I didn't think I'd be saying this, but I think Far Cry 3 has finally been overthrown as my favorite Far Cry game. I had so much fun with Far Cry 5, which I was kind of expecting just from a handful of clips that I'd seen here and there around the internet, but I was also very pleasantly surprised by the quality of writing in this game. Like, really surprised. I honestly went in just expecting the folks of Eden's Gate to be a bunch of red-pilled socially retarded rednecks sporting swastikas and hating on the godless libs or something, but I was completely off the mark. Joseph Seed is an awesome antagonist, dare I say better than Voss Montenegro even. I mean, charisma-wise, Voss is kind of unbeatable, because Michael Mando is the GOAT, but writing-wise, Joseph was outstanding from beginning to end. As far as emotional depth goes, I'm admittedly a bit mixed on him because, on one hand, Greg Brick's performance was terrific, and his connections to the supporting antagonists, his family, felt very genuine. But, on the other hand, he's also such a complete and utter psychopath that he's a bit hard to take too seriously at times. I mean, the guy killed his newborn daughter and had probably hundreds of people tortured. He's not what I would call swell to be around. But I think what impressed me most was the fact that they actually managed to pull off the I was right all along twist, almost perfectly too. I know New Dawn and Far Cry 6 kind of tampered with the specifics of it, which I'll say I'm not the biggest fan of, but in isolation, I think the big twist with Joseph regarding the nukes worked very well in the context of Far Cry 5's base story. And even just at a superficial level, the presentation combined with Greg's outstanding performance gave the finale of the game such an awesome dramatic flair. Though if I were to be completely transparent, I'd have to admit that applies to every other cutscene in the game as well. I don't know what it is, but Far Cry just does first-person cinematics so effectively. But let me be clear. This isn't an actual case of the villain was right all along, because Joseph was not right about anything other than his prophecy, but it was self-fulfilling and the nukes going off was always going to be on him, so it's not as if he was an actual prophet. You're not Hideo Kojima, my dude, you are Jim Jones with some ICBMs. Joseph is unmistakably a bad guy. He's a sociopath too wrapped up in the bliss of his faith to see the forest for the trees, but the reason the twist works is because of the self-fulfilling nature of it. He stacked the cards in his favor completely so as to ensure that he would always come out the victor. If you walk away, he gets to live and can rebuild his cult while you go nuts and kill your friends after having your MK Ultra brainwashing triggered. If you don't walk, he triggers the nukes and escapes with you to Dutch's bunker to eventually build another cult in the ashes of the New World. What a freaking menace. Or maybe he was right. The other way to interpret Far Cry 5's ending would be that your choice acts as validation of Joseph's entire character. If you do as he prophesied, you're confirming his paranoia, meaning that he was right to expect a nuclear war, and so it comes to be. If you do walk away, that means that Joseph is wrong, and that he was wrong about the coming collapse. There's a surprising amount of debate that's gone into the ambiguity of Far Cry 5's ending, and that's pretty impressive. I typically don't care for the idea that the player's choice could change what's actually happening prior to the choice. The first Infamous game comes to mind immediately, but it works really well here given the thematic elements of paranoia and Joseph's preemptive prophecies regarding the player and the setting. God, this game rocks. And to the game's credit, I really enjoyed the secondary antagonist as well. John is such a despicable rat that I could not wait to get my hands on him. Jacob is genuinely terrifying due to his history as a soldier and his understanding of MK Ultra brainwashing, and Faith is... I don't even know what to call her. She's different. Weird, strange, and tragic. I feel like I could make a whole video on her alone. She feels like more of a victim to Joseph than an ally, and that went a long way in characterizing both Joseph and herself. But when it comes to gameplay, I mean, it's Far Cry. This isn't a dynamic open world that sees major changes in NPC activity based on the events of the story. It's a sandbox playground for the player to let loose and have fun in using the various mechanics on offer. Far Cry really is great at taking a lot of seemingly simple mechanics and implementing them in ways that allow for a variety of possible experiences. Fire does damage over time and can spread depending on the environment. Sometimes enemy camps will have a caged animal for the player to let loose. You can command squad mates to cover certain areas with a simple tap of the D-pad. Those features seem simple enough, but then you piece together that if you let the animal loose on one side of the enemy camp, place your squad on the nearby hill, then start a fire at the only remaining path of escape, now you've used a handful of very simple mechanics to box in an entire enemy camp with no chance of them escaping. That's just one of many possible scenarios, and only the tip of the iceberg in regards to the mechanics. Once you start getting a feel for what you're really capable of as the player, the possibilities really are endless. I remember hearing for so long that this game was altogether just unimpressive and mid, but After playing it, I see why people who actually finished it look back on it so fondly. Far Cry 5 is awesome. It's definitely not perfect, the AI is laughably stupid, there are occasionally technical hiccups, certain parts of the story are rather questionable, such as the fact that you can be hit with bliss bullets while flying in the sky, fall unconscious, and yet somehow survive. And there are some very forgettable supporting characters, but what it does well, it does really well, and I genuinely cannot wait to come back to this game eventually. I'm a bit hesitant to say that I'm going to be going for the Platinum trophy, only because there are multiplayer trophies and the very idea of that makes me want to shove my head into a blender, but I'll definitely be coming back, if only to satisfy the completionist in me. Plus the DLCs look fun. 8 out of 10, I loved it. After playing Transistor, then Bastion, and seeing my girlfriend play Hades, I was expecting another isometric RPG, but instead I ended up with some kind of mythical NBA jam, and honestly, I loved it. Pyre is a fairly simple game, but the back and forth of combat combined with all the unique characters made for such a cool experience. Combine that with well-written characters that are full of personality, and I was eager to use every member of my team as much as possible while investing into them as much as I could in my given playtime. Though I will say, if the game suffers from anything, it is the lack of voice acting. I mean, it has these kind of Sims-like blurbs of gibberish, but it's far from meaningful voice performances, and it makes the game feel like an absolute slog between writes. Seriously, when it takes nearly 15 minutes to get from one match to the next, and that's with me skipping the dialogue, I wouldn't blame anyone for quitting out of sheer boredom. I'm cool with characters talking for minutes on end. I mean, some of my favorite games include Fallout, Mass Effect, Persona, and Metal Gear, but when I'm just starting a game and I find myself really enjoying the gameplay only to have so much going on between the gameplay, and with no voice performances to help engage me, yeah, I'm sorry, but there's no other way to put it. It's just really boring. It's a shame too, because there is some legitimately fantastic character work and plot going on here. While I'd argue that Transistor has a better overall story, Pyre was excellent. A massive step up from Bastion at the very least. All of the characters are honestly so lovable, and I love that they all got their own send-offs for the game's finale. I felt like I'd bonded with them as a group throughout the course of the journey. Hashtag Nightwings for life, baby. But God, I cannot lie, it took some serious effort to make it through this at times because of just how much reading you have to do between most missions. And even though the game is short, it does not let up for pretty much the full length of the game. But looking past the god-awful pacing, there is a fantastic story here, so I can at least forgive it for its failure in that regard. And honestly, the gameplay is just so fun that I can easily see myself coming back to get the Platinum trophy, and maybe even every couple of years or so, because there's really no other game like it. Overall, Pyre is a major step up from Bastion, but also not quite at the level of Transistor. As a fanboy of Supergiant, I'm gonna give this game an 8 out of 10.